couple of things I want to try to sort through here in terms of the numbers. And it's a conversation I know we have every day, but we look at the caseload, people debate the caseload, then they talk about the hospitalization rate, and then they talk about the death rate. The great news is the death rate is coming down. Hospitalization rate looks like it's inching up, but inching up marginally. My question to you is, what's the tipping point in terms of your worries around specific states at this moment?
Well, the death rates are a lagging indicator, so it doesn't reflect what's happening now. It doesn't necessarily reflect what's happened last week. And the cases are building very quickly, which suggests that the spread is pretty pervasive at the community level. Once you start to get this kind of growth day over day, you have a pretty widespread outbreak. But I think what people are most focused on is the hospitalizations. It's a lagging indicator, but not as lagging as death. Time to death is about 2 weeks from time to hospitalization. Time to hospitalization is probably about a week after the onset of symptoms. And so hospitalizations are a more sensitive indicator of where you are in the epidemic. And hospitalizations are going up. Now, that said, they're not going up at the same pace that we saw during the height of the epidemic relative to the cases that are getting turned over, in part because this isn't as large as the first wave that we had, and in part because it's affecting younger people. The spread seems to be in a younger cohort because older people are protecting themselves better. But when you look at Texas, for example, with 3,700 people now hospitalized, California with about 3,700 hospitalized, another 1,100 suspected, 1,100 in their ICUs. Cities like Houston are now having hospitals like Children's Hospital accept adult patients because they're becoming pressed. The hospital system isn't on the brink of becoming overwhelmed as we saw in New York City, but it's certainly under strain right now in states like Florida, Texas, California, Arizona. So it is getting full or fuller. They still have capacity, but that could change quickly, and that's what the governors are focused on.
The other question I had relates to this age issue, which is, how much do you think that the morbidity rate has come down because of the age of the people getting it versus folks who are now getting combinations of remdesivir and plasma and other combinations and therapies that are either emerging or being tested?
It's both of those things, but we need to see what happens over the next 2 weeks because the hospitals really haven't had the surge in cases yet. They're having that right now. Now, as the hospitals fill up with COVID patients, we're going to see how much the mortality rate declines as a function of the fact that it's a younger cohort, younger age cohort, but also we have better treatments. There's no question that we're going to preserve more life now that we have these therapeutic opportunities available to us. And also doctors have learned a lot about how to treat COVID patients, where to be aggressive, where not to be aggressive, so you don't stress these patients. For example, they're not intubating as quickly. They're trying to manage more patients on non-rebreathers or 100% high-flow oxygen. So there's a lot of changes in care. We will see that affect outcomes and will preserve more life. No question about that.
Right now, is there one therapeutic out there that you think has the most promise in terms of something that you think is going to come on market potentially this fall that will keep people from the hospital to begin with?
Regeneron's drug. So the therapeutic antibodies from Regeneron and Lilly, they're the furthest ahead. Vir Biotechnology, Amgen's further behind those companies. I think one or more of these will be successful. The challenge is going to be that they're probably going to be most beneficial when introduced earlier in the course of disease, and we're going to be dose limited. So we're not going to have enough doses to use it very indiscriminately as a prophylaxis for exposures or people who have just mild symptoms who you don't want to progress. So it's likely to be reserved for hospitalized patients, at least initially. And in those patients, it might be the least beneficial because those patients might have progressed. They might have enough virus on board that's not going to have the biggest impact. Regeneron is doing a very good study where they're studying it in all these settings as a prophylaxis, as a treatment in early disease, as a treatment in more severe patients and intubated patients. And so we're going to have some good answers on this. But I think those drugs could be a game changer when used in the right setting. Hopefully we'll have enough supply to use it in the right setting. This is, if I was in the government now, this is what I'd be focused on, trying to free up domestic manufacturing capacity and make these drugs at scale. We don't seem to be doing that, which is a challenge.
Just back to Texas and the seriousness of the situation there. I saw something on Twitter, too, yesterday. It was a doctor from a Texas hospital talking about what he was seeing there. And it reminded me a lot of what we used to see from New York City doctors when things were pretty bad here and starting to really heat up. How dire is the situation at the hospitals there?
Not dire, but I've talked to some doctors there, and they're getting pressed. There's a lot of COVID patients on the floors right now, and the ICUs are filling up. Arizona is probably at 85% capacity on their general hospital floors in their ICU, and last week they were saying that 40% of the general medical beds were COVID patients, so it must be higher now. So these hospitals are starting to fill up. Now, the states have a lot of capacity. They've learned a lot, so they can move patients around, and they also really haven't implemented their emergency operations where they're expanding ICUs. Some cities are doing that. So Miami-Dade's talking about expanding ICU capacity. Houston's doing that. So they're starting to get pressed. But when you look at the growth in cases, this has been underway for a while. And what you worry about is they're sort of hitting exponential growth. We'll see towards the end of this week, because there's always this dip after the weekend in cases, and then it shoots back up again. When we look at sort of Thursday and Friday and Saturday, and if cases are really shooting back up again, and these cities are reporting 5,000 cases a day, which they might be, that's going to be a pretty bad indicator. So that's what I'd be looking for.